The leather reins slipped through Eleanor Hartwell's trembling fingers just as the stagecoach lurched over a particularly vicious rut in the trail, and she watched in horror as her mother's silver locket sailed through the open window and disappeared into the dust and sagebrush of the Wyoming territory. "Stop, please stop," Eleanor cried out, but the driver was already shouting at the horses, urging them faster as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The other passengers stared at her with a mixture of sympathy and irritation as she pressed her face to the window, watching the trail recede behind them. The locket was gone, swallowed by miles of wilderness between Cheyenne and the small settlement of Broken Creek, where her brother waited. It was 1878, and the frontier was still wild enough that stopping for a piece of jewelry meant risking everything from bandits to bad weather. Eleanor slumped back against the worn leather seat, fighting tears. That locket had been the last thing her mother pressed into her hands before the fever took her in Boston 6 months ago. Inside were tiny portraits of her parents on their wedding day, faces young and hopeful and untouched by the hardships that would eventually claim them both. Her father had died 2 years prior in a railroad accident, and now Eleanor had nothing left of her family except that locket and her older brother James, who had gone west to make his fortune in cattle ranching 3 years ago. "It is just a trinket, miss," the woman sitting across from her said, not unkindly. She was older, weathered, with the look of someone who had learned not to cling too tightly to material things. "Out here, you will lose much more before you gain anything worth keeping." Eleanor wanted to explain that it was not just a trinket, that it held her entire history, but she pressed her lips together and turned her face back to the window. The Wyoming landscape rolled past in shades of gold and green, vast and beautiful and utterly indifferent to her grief. She told herself the woman was right. She was 22 years old, traveling alone to a territory she had only read about in newspapers, to live with a brother she barely recognized anymore based on his infrequent letters. She would need to become harder, more practical. She could not afford sentimentality. But as the stagecoach rattled on toward Broken Creek, Eleanor could not stop thinking about that locket lying somewhere in the dirt, waiting to be buried by time and weather. Somewhere behind them, miles back along the trail, a cowboy named Thomas "Tom" Brennan was guiding his horse along the same rutted path, heading home after a long cattle drive that had taken him all the way to the railhead in Cheyenne. He was tired, covered in trail dust, and looking forward to a hot meal and a soft bed, even if that bed was just a bunk in the ranch house he shared with a dozen other cowhands. At 26, Tom had been working cattle since he was 14, and he knew every mile of this territory like he knew the scars on his own hands. His horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Sage, picked her way carefully around a deep rut when something caught the late afternoon sunlight and flashed like a signal fire. Tom pulled up short, squinting at the ground. There, half buried in the dust beside a clump of sagebrush, was a silver locket on a broken chain. He dismounted and picked it up, brushing away the dirt with careful fingers. The locket was finely made, too fine for these parts, with delicate engraving that spoke of craftsmen back east. Tom pressed the tiny clasp, and the locket sprang open, revealing 2 small portraits. A man and a woman, dressed in the fashion of maybe 20 years ago, stared out at him with the solemn expressions people wore for photographs. They looked happy despite the formality, their hands clasped together between them. Tom closed the locket carefully and looked up and down the trail. Whoever had lost this would be heartbroken. The portraits meant this was not just jewelry but family, memory, history. He had lost his own mother when he was 8 years old, and he still carried her rosary beads in his saddlebag, wrapped in a scrap of her favorite shawl. He understood exactly what this locket meant to someone. The question was, who had lost it and how could he possibly find them? Tom studied the trail. Stagecoach tracks, relatively fresh, heading northwest toward Broken Creek. Boot prints from when the driver had stopped to water the horses at Miller's Creek about 2 miles back. The locket had probably fallen from the stagecoach, which meant whoever lost it was likely heading to Broken Creek or one of the other small settlements beyond. He could have pocketed the locket or left it where it lay, figuring it was not his problem. Most men would have. But Tom's mother had raised him better than that in the few short years he had known her, and his father, before whiskey took him too, had always said a man's character was measured by what he did when nobody was watching. Tom tucked the locket carefully into his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and remounted Sage. "Come on, girl," he said quietly. "We have got a detour to make." Broken Creek was another 90 miles northwest, through terrain that could turn treacherous with little warning. Tom had been planning to head southwest to the ranch where he worked, only 30 miles away, but that would have to wait. He turned Sage's head toward Broken Creek and urged her into an easy lope, the kind of ground-eating pace a good cow pony could maintain for hours. The sun was setting by the time Tom made camp that first night, and he sat by his small fire studying the locket again in the flickering light. The woman in the portrait had kind eyes and dark hair swept back in an intricate style. The man looked proud and steady, with the bearing of someone who worked with his hands. Tom wondered what had become of them, whether they were still alive, what their daughter or wife or sister was doing riding a stagecoach through Wyoming territory. He slept restlessly, aware that every hour he delayed might make it harder to find the locket's owner. By dawn he was back in the saddle, pushing Sage as fast as he dared. The trail was rough, winding through hills covered in pine and aspen, then dropping into valleys where creeks ran cold and clear with snowmelt from the mountains. Tom saw antelope in the distance, and once a small herd of elk, but he barely registered the beauty around him. His mind was fixed on Broken Creek, and the hope that he could find whoever had lost this precious thing. He passed a freight wagon headed the opposite direction, and the driver told him there had been a stagecoach through just yesterday evening, right on schedule. Tom felt a surge of relief. He was on the right track. By the second day, his supplies were running low, and Sage was starting to show signs of fatigue despite her sturdy constitution. Tom stopped at a small trading post run by a French-Canadian trapper named Baptiste, who sold him jerky and hardtack and fresh oats for the horse. "You are pushing hard, my friend," Baptiste observed, his accent still thick despite decades in America. "What drives you?" Tom showed him the locket. "Someone lost this on the trail." "I am trying to return it." Baptiste's eyebrows rose. "You ride all this way for a trinket that belongs to a stranger." "It is not a trinket," Tom said quietly. "It is family." The old trapper studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There are not many men like you anymore, I think. The world, she needs more. Go with God, Cowboy." Tom rode on, the locket a constant weight in his pocket. He thought about turning back more than once. This was foolish, chasing after a stranger for a piece of jewelry when he should be getting back to work. The ranch foreman would not be pleased about his extended absence. But each time Tom considered giving up, he would think about his mother's rosary beads, about how he would feel if he lost them, and he kept riding. The country grew wilder as he pushed northwest. He saw signs of Shoshone or Arapaho camps in the distance, smoke rising from fires, and he kept his distance, not wanting trouble. Relations between the tribes and the white settlers were tense at best, though Tom had always believed there was enough land for everyone if people would just stop being so greedy about it. But that was not how the world worked, and he was just one cowboy with no power to change anything. On the third day, Tom crested a hill and saw Broken Creek spread out below him in a valley where 3 small streams converged. It was not much of a town, just a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, and scattered houses and ranches spreading out into the surrounding grassland. But it was civilization, and somewhere down there was the person who had lost the locket. Tom rode into town just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He was trail-worn and dusty, and Sage was practically asleep on her feet, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. He had ridden 100 miles, maybe more, and now all he had to do was find one person in a town of maybe 300 souls. How hard could that be? Eleanor stood in the doorway of her brother's ranch house, staring out at the endless Wyoming sky and feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Broken Creek was nothing like Boston. There were no paved streets, no gas lamps, no museums or concert halls or bookshops. There was just wind and grass and a horizon that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. James had been kind enough when she arrived 2 days ago, but he was a stranger to her now. The brother she remembered had been bookish and gentle, always with his nose in a law text. The man who greeted her at the stagecoach was sunburned and rough-handed, smelling of horses and tobacco, his conversation full of talk about cattle prices and grazing rights. He had a pretty wife named Martha who was heavily pregnant with their first child, and they had welcomed Eleanor warmly, but she could see the questions in their eyes. What was a Boston lady going to do out here? How would she fit into this hard, practical world? Eleanor did not have answers. She had come west because there was nothing left for her in Boston, because her mother's death had left her alone in a city that suddenly felt hostile and cold. James had sent money for the journey and promised her a place in his home for as long as she needed. It was charity, really, but she had no choice but to accept. She reached up to touch the place where her locket should have been, and felt the familiar ache of loss. Losing it had felt like losing her mother all over again, like severing the last connection to the life she had known. Martha had tried to comfort her, saying that material things did not matter, that family was what counted. But Martha still had her family. She had not watched her mother waste away from fever, had not packed up an entire life into 2 trunks and traveled 2,000 miles to live among strangers. Eleanor. "Supper is ready," Martha called from inside. Eleanor turned away from the sunset and went inside, pasting on a smile she did not feel. She would adapt. She had no choice. This was her life now. Tom started his search at the town's only hotel, a ramshackle building that called itself the Broken Creek Inn despite being little more than a boarding house. The proprietor, a thin man with suspicious eyes, confirmed that the stagecoach from Cheyenne had arrived 2 days ago and that most of the passengers had spent one night before moving on. "Though there was one young woman who got off here permanent," the man said, scratching his chin. "Pretty thing from back east, I heard, gone to live with her brother." "What is her brother's name?" Tom asked, hope surging in his chest. "James Hartwell, has a ranch about 3 miles north of town. You cannot miss it. Big house with a red barn." Tom thanked him and headed back out to where he had left Sage at the livery stable. The stable owner, a gruff old man named Cooper, was already brushing her down. "Fine horse you got here," Cooper said approvingly. "Looks like you have ridden her hard, though." 3 days from east of Cheyenne," Tom admitted. "I need to get out to the Hartwell Ranch tonight." "How far did you say it was?" 3 miles, give or take, but it is full dark now, son. Why not wait until morning?" Tom pulled out the locket. "Because someone is missing this, and every day I wait is another day they think it is gone forever." Cooper's weathered face softened. "I see." "Well, if you are set on it, head due north on the main road, and you will see a marker for Hartwell's spread. Cannot miss it even in the dark if you got a good moon." Tom looked up. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows. "I will manage. Can you board my horse for the night? I will come back for her tomorrow." "Sure thing." But you will be walking 3 miles each way in the dark. I have walked farther for worse reasons, Tom said. The walk to Hartwell's ranch gave Tom time to rehearse what he would say. He had never been good with words, always more comfortable with horses than people, and the idea of knocking on a stranger's door this late at night made him nervous. But he had come too far to stop now. The ranch house appeared as a dark shape against the starry sky, yellow lamplight glowing in the windows. Tom could see the red barn Cooper had mentioned, and beyond it, the dark shapes of cattle grazing in a fenced pasture. It looked like a prosperous operation, well-maintained and organized. He walked up to the front door and knocked, his heart pounding harder than it had any right to. Footsteps sounded inside, and then the door opened to reveal a tall man in his late 20s, with the same dark hair and fine features as the woman in the Locket portrait, though aged by sun and hard work. "Help you?" James Hartwell asked, his tone cautious. It was late for visitors, and Tom was a stranger. "My name is Tom Brennan," Tom said, pulling off his hat. "I am sorry for the lateness of the hour, but I believe I have something that belongs to someone in your household. I found it on the trail from Cheyenne 3 days ago, and I have been riding to return it." James's eyebrows rose. "What is it?" Tom pulled out the locket and held it up. Even in the dim light from the doorway, the silver caught the glow and gleamed. James's eyes widened. Eleanor, come here." There were more footsteps, lighter this time, and then a woman appeared beside James. Tom's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with just her features, though those were fine enough. Dark hair pinned up loosely, eyes the color of a mountain sky, a face that showed intelligence and sadness and something fierce underneath. She was wearing a simple cotton dress, practical for ranch life, but she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had been raised with elegance and education. Eleanor's gaze fell on the locket in Tom's outstretched hand, and her face went completely white. "That is mine," she whispered. "My mother's locket. I dropped it from the stagecoach. I thought it was lost forever." "It was half buried beside the trail," Tom said, his voice rough. "I saw it catch the light. When I opened it and saw the portraits, I knew someone would be missing it, something terrible. I have been riding for 3 days to find you." Eleanor reached out with shaking hands and took the locket. She opened it, and tears spilled down her cheeks when she saw her parents' faces looking back at her. "You rode all that way just to return this. You do not even know me." "No, ma'am, I do not," Tom admitted, "but I know what it is to lose something that matters. My mother passed when I was young, and I still carry her rosary beads everywhere I go. If I lost them, I would be devastated. I could not leave your locket in the dirt knowing what it must mean to you." James was staring at Tom with something like awe. "You rode 100 miles to return a locket to a stranger. That is the most decent thing I have heard of in a long time. Please come in. Let us give you supper at least and a place to sleep tonight." Tom wanted to refuse to maintain the proper distance, but his stomach was growling and he was bone-tired. "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing," Eleanor said, her voice still thick with tears. She was clutching the locket to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. "You have given me back my family. The least we can do is offer you a meal and a bed." So Tom stepped inside, into a warm kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee. Martha appeared from another room, her pregnant belly leading the way, and introductions were made. They sat him down at the kitchen table, and Martha heated up leftover stew while Eleanor clutched her locket and tried to compose herself. "I am sorry," she kept saying. "I am not usually this emotional. It is just that I thought I would never see it again. My mother gave it to me before she died 6 months ago. My father is in there too. He died 2 years past. This locket is all I have left of them." "You do not need to apologize," Tom said gently. "Grief is not something to be ashamed of." Eleanor looked at him then, really looked at him, and Tom felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were also sharp, assessing, intelligent. She saw him, not just a dusty cowboy, but the man who had ridden 100 miles because it was the right thing to do. "Where are you from, Mr. Brennan?" James asked, setting a cup of coffee in front of Tom. "Please, call me Tom. I work on the Double R Ranch about 120 miles southeast of here. I was heading back from a cattle drive when I found the locket." "So you have ridden even farther out of your way," Martha said, shaking her head in wonder. "Your employer must be a patient man." Tom grimaced. "I am hoping he will understand. If not, well, I will find work elsewhere. Some things are more important than keeping a job." They talked late into the night, and Tom found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around strangers. James and Martha were good people, hardworking and kind, and Eleanor was fascinating. She told him about Boston, about her life there, about how strange and overwhelming the frontier seemed to her. Tom told her about growing up on ranches and trails, about the beauty of the open range, about the sky at dawn when you are the only person awake for miles. He noticed the way Eleanor's face came alive when she talked about books and music, things he knew little about. He noticed the sadness that lingered behind her smiles, the grief she was still processing. He noticed the way she kept touching the locket, reassuring herself it was real. And he noticed that he did not want to leave. Eventually, Martha declared it was past time for bed, and she showed Tom to a small room that James used as an office. There was a narrow cot made up with clean blankets, and Tom thought it might be the most comfortable bed he had ever seen. "Thank you," he said, "for your hospitality. I will be out of your way first thing in the morning." "You will stay for breakfast," Martha said firmly, "and if you have business in Broken Creek, you are welcome to stay longer." James could use help with the ranch work. "We have more than we can manage right now, especially with the baby coming." Tom hesitated. He should get back to the Double R, explain his absence, hope his job was still waiting. But the Double R was just a job, and there would be other jobs. The way Eleanor had looked at him when he returned her locket, the gratitude and wonder in her eyes, that was something he wanted to see again. "I might take you up on that," Tom said. "If you are serious about needing help." "Deadly serious," James said, appearing in the doorway. "I can pay decent wages, and we have a bunkhouse that is currently empty." "If you are looking for work, Tom, I would be glad to have a man of your character on my ranch." So it was decided, just like that. Tom would stay in Broken Creek at least for a while. He told himself it was because the job offer was good, and James seemed like a fair employer. He told himself it had nothing to do with dark-haired Eleanor and the way his heart had stuttered when she smiled at him through her tears. But he was not a good liar, even to himself. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and surprising happiness. Tom threw himself into ranch work, helping James with everything from mending fences to breaking horses to moving cattle between pastures. The work was familiar and satisfying, and James turned out to be an excellent boss, fair and hardworking and willing to get his hands dirty alongside his hired help. But it was the evenings that Tom looked forward to. Every night he would wash up at the pump behind the bunkhouse and walk up to the main house for supper. Martha was an excellent cook, and the four of them would sit around the kitchen table eating and talking until the lamps burned low. Eleanor was always there, helping Martha with the cooking and cleaning despite Martha's protests that she was a guest, not a servant. But Eleanor insisted she needed something to do, some way to feel useful. Tom watched her adapt to ranch life with a mixture of admiration and concern. She was trying so hard to fit in, to be strong, but he could see the struggle in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. One evening about 2 weeks after Tom's arrival, he found Eleanor sitting on the porch alone, staring out at the sunset. She was wearing the locket, as she did every day now, and her fingers played with it absently. "May I join you?" Tom asked. Eleanor looked up and smiled, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Of course. You do not have to ask permission, Tom. You are part of the household now." Tom sat, stretching out his long legs. His body ached pleasantly from a day of hard work. "Beautiful evening," he said. "It is," Eleanor agreed. "I am starting to understand why James loves it here. Boston has its charms, but there is something about this land. It is so vast and wild and alive. Sometimes I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in years." "And other times?" Tom asked gently. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised. "How did you know there were other times?" "I see it in your face sometimes. Homesickness, maybe, or grief, or just the weight of everything being so different from what you knew." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "All of those things," she admitted finally. "I want to love it here. I do love it in many ways, but I also feel so lost sometimes. Like I do not know who I am supposed to be in this place. In Boston, I was a daughter, a teacher at a girls' school, someone with a purpose and a place. Here I am just James's sister, an extra mouth to feed." "You are more than that," Tom said firmly. "You are Eleanor. You are smart and kind and stronger than you know. You picked up your entire life and moved across a continent into the unknown. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Eleanor said with a wry smile. "Sometimes those are the same thing. And there is no shame in that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower. Tom was acutely aware of Eleanor's presence beside him, the way the fading light caught in her dark hair, the delicate line of her profile. He had never felt this way about a woman before. There had been girls in various cow towns, brief flirtations that never went anywhere because he was always moving on to the next job, the next trail. But Eleanor was different. Eleanor made him want to stay in one place, to build something lasting. "Tom," Eleanor said suddenly, "why did you really ride all that way to return my locket? And please do not say it was just the right thing to do. I have been thinking about it, and it was such an extraordinary thing. Most men would not have bothered." Tom considered his answer carefully. "My mother died when I was 8, he said finally. "Cholera. It happened fast, and we were on a trail drive with my father, so there was not even time to get her to a doctor. We buried her on the prairie with nothing but a wooden cross to mark the spot. For years, I was angry at my father for that, for not taking better care of her, for letting her die in the middle of nowhere. But as I got older, I realized he did the best he could. He was just a man trying to make a living in a hard world." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Anyway, before she died, my mother gave me her rosary beads. She was Catholic, came from Ireland as a girl. Those beads were the only thing she brought from the old country, the only connection to her family. She told me to keep them safe, to pray for her when she was gone. I was just a kid, and I did not really understand what she was giving me. But now I do. Those beads are my history, my connection to a woman I barely remember but who shaped everything I am." He pulled the rosary from his pocket, the wooden beads worn smooth from years of handling. "When I saw your locket, when I opened it and saw those portraits, I knew exactly what it meant. It was not just jewelry. It was love, family, memory. Everything that matters. I could not leave it in the dirt, I just could not." Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding." Their eyes met and held, and Tom felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, sitting on a porch in Wyoming as the stars began to appear overhead. He wanted to reach for her hand, to close the small distance between them, but he held back. It was too soon. She was grieving, adjusting to a new life. She did not need him complicating things with feelings she might not return. But the next day, Tom caught Eleanor watching him as he worked with a young horse in the corral, and the look in her eyes made his heart race. And when she brought him a dipper of water and their fingers brushed, the touch sent electricity up his arm. Something was growing between them, tender and precious and terrifying. James noticed, of course. He cornered Tom in the barn one afternoon about 3 weeks after Tom's arrival. "I see the way you look at my sister," James said without preamble. Tom's first instinct was to deny it, but he had never been good at lying. "I mean no disrespect," he said carefully. "Eleanor is a lady, and I know I am just a cowboy with nothing to offer her." "That is not what I am concerned about," James said. "I am concerned about her being hurt. Eleanor has been through hell in the last year, losing both parents, leaving everything she knew behind. She is vulnerable right now, and if you are just looking for a passing fancy, I need you to back off." Tom met James's eyes steadily. "I would never hurt her, and this is not a passing fancy." "I have never felt this way about anyone." James studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you. You are a good man, Tom. I have seen that in how you work, how you treat people. But Eleanor is my little sister. I have to look out for her." "I would expect nothing less," Tom said, "and for what it is worth, I have not spoken to her about any of this." "I am not sure she feels the same way." "Oh, she feels the same way," James said with a slight smile. "Martha and I have both seen it. She lights up when you walk into a room. But she is scared, I think. Scared of losing someone else she cares about, scared of getting hurt. So if you are serious about her, you are going to have to be patient." "I can be patient," Tom said. And he meant it. Eleanor was worth waiting for, but patience was tested when, a few days later, another ranch hand showed up looking for work. His name was Dale Morrison, and he was handsome in a slick, practiced way that immediately put Tom's teeth on edge. James hired him because they genuinely needed the help, and Dale was an experienced cowboy with good references. Dale took one look at Eleanor and decided she was his next conquest. He turned on the charm, complimenting her cooking, offering to help her with chores, telling elaborate stories about his adventures on the trail. Eleanor was polite but distant, and Tom could tell she was not interested, but Dale did not take the hint. One evening, Tom walked into the barn to find Dale cornering Eleanor near the horse stalls, standing too close, his hand on the wall beside her head. "Come on, darling," Dale was saying. "Just one dance at the social on Saturday. What harm could it do?" "I said no, thank you," Eleanor replied, her voice cold. "Please step back." "You are just playing hard to get," Dale said with a grin. "I like that in a woman." Tom's vision went red. He crossed the barn in 3 long strides and grabbed Dale by the shoulder, spinning him around. "The lady said no, back off." Dale's face flushed with anger. "This is none of your business, Brennan." "It became my business when you failed to respect her wishes," Tom said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now apologize to Miss Hartwell and get out of here." For a moment, Tom thought Dale might take a swing at him. He was ready for it, his hands already curling into fists. But Dale must have seen something in Tom's eyes that made him reconsider. He stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Fine, fine, no harm meant, I was just being friendly." He shot Eleanor a look that was anything but friendly. "Maybe you should teach your guard dog some manners." He stalked out of the barn and Tom turned to Eleanor. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Eleanor said, but her hands were shaking. "Thank you." He has been like that for days, and I did not know how to make him stop without causing a scene. "You should have told James or me. You should not have to deal with that." "I thought I could handle it myself," Eleanor said, and there was frustration in her voice. "I am so tired of being treated like I am fragile, like I need to be protected from everything. I want to be strong, I want to belong here." "Eleanor," Tom said gently, "asking for help when you need it is not weakness, it is wisdom, and you do belong here. You have made this place brighter just by being in it." Eleanor looked up at him, and Tom saw something shift in her expression. "You really believe that, do not you, that I belong?" "I know it," Tom said. And for what it is worth, you are the strongest person I know. You have lost everything and you are still standing. That is not fragility, that is steel." They stood there in the quiet barn, the smell of hay and horses surrounding them, and Tom saw the moment Eleanor's walls started to come down. She stepped closer and he could see the flutter of her pulse at her throat, the way her breath quickened. "Tom," she whispered, "I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of this, of you. Of what I am starting to feel." Tom wanted so badly to close the distance between them, to pull her into his arms and promise her that everything would be all right. But he held himself still, giving her space. "You do not have to be afraid of me. I would never hurt you, Eleanor, not for anything in this world." "I know that," Eleanor said. "But people do not have to mean to hurt you. My father did not mean to fall under that train. My mother did not mean to catch fever and die. But they did, and I was left alone, and I do not know if I can survive losing someone else I care about." "So your answer is to never care about anyone?" Tom asked gently. "That is not living, Eleanor, that is just existing." "I know," Eleanor said, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know, but I do not know how to be brave enough to try." Tom did reach for her then, but only to catch her tears with his thumb, a gesture so tender it made Eleanor's breath hitch. "You do not have to have all the answers right now," he said. "We can take this slow. We can just be friends if that is all you can handle. I am not going anywhere. Promise," Eleanor whispered. "I promise. I rode 100 miles to return your locket." "You really think I am going to give up on you now?" Eleanor laughed through her tears, and the sound was like music. "You are either the most persistent man I have ever met or the most foolish." "Maybe both," Tom said with a grin. James fired Dale the next morning after hearing what happened. Dale left cursing and making threats, but Tom did not give him a second thought. He was too focused on Eleanor, on the cautious hope he saw growing in her eyes. They did take it slow, but the feelings between them were undeniable. Eleanor started joining Tom for his morning rides, claiming she needed to learn to handle a horse properly if she was going to live on a ranch. Tom taught her patiently, his hands steadying hers on the reins, his voice calm and encouraging. They rode out into the hills surrounding the ranch, and Tom showed her all the secret beautiful places he had discovered. A meadow full of wildflowers, a creek where trout jumped in the early morning light, a stand of aspen trees that turned gold in the fall. "This is a whole world I never knew existed," Eleanor said one morning as they watched the sun rise over the mountains. "In Boston, nature was something you visited in a park on Sunday afternoons. But here it is everywhere all the time. It is overwhelming and wonderful all at once." "It can be harsh too," Tom warned. "Winter here is brutal. And there are dangers, rattlesnakes, mountain lions, sudden storms, but if you respect the land, learn to read the signs, you can make a good life." "Will you teach me?" Eleanor asked. "To read the signs, I mean, to understand this place the way you do." "I will teach you everything I know," Tom said, and he meant it in ways that went beyond just ranch skills. He wanted to show her everything, to share his whole life with her. As spring turned to summer, Eleanor bloomed like the wildflowers in the high meadows. The sadness in her eyes faded, replaced by something vibrant and alive. She grew tanned and strong from working alongside Martha, tending the vegetable garden, caring for the chickens, learning to churn butter and make cheese. She helped Martha prepare for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, turning the small bedroom off the kitchen into a nursery. And every evening, after supper, she and Tom would sit on the porch and talk for hours. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Tom told her about his years on cattle drives, about seeing the buffalo herds before they were hunted to near extinction, about the changing West, and how sometimes he felt like he was living in the last days of something that would never come again. Eleanor told him about her mother's illness, about the helplessness of watching someone you love fade away. She told him about her father's death, about how the railroad company had refused to accept responsibility, leaving her and her mother with almost nothing. She told him about teaching at the girls' school, about her students, and how much she missed helping young minds discover the joy of learning. "You could teach here," Tom said one night. "Broken Creek does not have a proper school. The children learn at home if they are lucky or not at all if they are not. You could change that." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "Do you really think so?" "I would need a building, books, supplies." "James and I could build you a schoolhouse," Tom said. "It would not be fancy, but it would be solid. And as for books, maybe we could ask people to donate. Or write to charitable organizations back east. There has to be a way." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, startling them both. "You would do that for me, build me a school." Tom's arms came around her waist automatically, pulling her close. She fit against him perfectly, like she was made to be there. "Eleanor, I would do just about anything for you." "I thought you knew that by now." She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, and Tom saw his own feelings reflected there. Love, hope, fear, desire, all tangled together. "I am not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Or maybe I am, but I do not care. Tom, I love you," Tom said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I have loved you since the moment you started crying over that locket. Maybe even before that, when I was holding it in my hands and imagining the person who had lost it. I know it is fast. I know you might not feel the same way yet, but I had to tell you, I love you, Eleanor Hartwell." "I love you too," Eleanor said, and she was crying and laughing at the same time. "I have been trying so hard not to, trying to protect myself, but it is no use. I love you, Tom Brennan. I love your kindness and your honor and the way you see the world. I love that you rode 100 miles to return something precious to a stranger. I love everything about you." Tom kissed her then, a soft press of lips that tasted like tears and promise and forever. Eleanor melted against him, her fingers tangling in his hair, and Tom felt something lock into place in his chest. This was what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. Not just love, but home. Belonging. Eleanor. They might have stayed there all night, lost in each other, if Martha had not cleared her throat from the doorway. "While I am happy for you both," she said, trying to sound stern but failing to hide her smile, "let us maintain some propriety. Eleanor, come help me with the dishes. Tom, James is looking for you in the barn." They pulled apart reluctantly, both flushed and grinning like fools. James was indeed in the barn, supposedly checking on a mare who was due to foal. But Tom suspected he had been dispatched by Martha to give the new couple some space apart to cool down. "So," James said without looking up from examining the mare, "I take it you and Eleanor have come to an understanding." "Yes, sir," Tom said. "I love your sister, and if you give me your blessing, I intend to marry her. I do not have much to offer right now, just what I have saved from years of cowboying, but I am a hard worker and I will spend every day of my life making her happy." James straightened and turned to face Tom. His expression was serious, but his eyes were kind. "I know you will. I have seen how you look at her, how you treat her. You are a good man, Tom. But I have to ask, are you sure about this? You have only known each other a few months. That is awfully fast." "I know," Tom said, "but when something is right, you know it. I have been drifting from job to job for years, never feeling like I had a place to land. Eleanor is my place. She is my home. I am as sure of this as I have ever been of anything." James nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing, but do not rush her. Let her set the pace. She has been through a lot." "I will," Tom promised. "I will wait as long as she needs." But Eleanor, it turned out, did not want to wait long. A week later, as they were riding back from checking on the cattle in the north pasture, she pulled her horse to a stop and turned to Tom. "Marry me," she said. Tom nearly fell out of his saddle. "What?" Marry me, Eleanor repeated, her cheeks pink but her gaze steady. I know I am supposed to wait for you to ask, but I have never been good at following the rules. I love you, Tom. I want to build a life with you, so marry me, please. Tom started laughing, the joy bubbling up from deep in his chest. Yes, he said. Yes, 1,000 times yes, though I was planning to ask you properly with a ring and everything. I do not need a ring, Eleanor said. I have my locket, which you returned to me. That is worth more than all the rings in the world. You are getting a ring anyway, Tom said firmly. I might be a cowboy, but I know how to do this right. They rode back to the ranch house at a gallop, both of them laughing like children. Martha burst into happy tears when they announced their engagement, and James produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They toasted to love and new beginnings, and Tom felt like the luckiest man alive. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the small church in Broken Creek. It was a simple ceremony, with Martha standing up for Eleanor and James standing up for Tom. The whole town turned out, curious about the Eastern lady and the cowboy who had ridden 100 miles to return her locket. The story had spread, growing more romantic with each retelling, until some versions had Tom fighting off outlaws and crossing raging rivers to return the precious jewelry. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers from the meadow where Tom had first told her he loved her. Tom wore his Sunday best, his hair slicked back, his hands shaking slightly as he slipped the gold ring onto Eleanor's finger. It was not a fancy ring, just a plain band he had bought with the last of his savings, but Eleanor looked at it like it was made of diamonds. I, Thomas Brennan, take you, Eleanor Hartwell, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Tom said, his voice rough with emotion. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to build you that school to make you laugh when you are sad, to hold you when you are scared. I promise to be the man you deserve every single day for as long as we both shall live. There was not a dry eye in the church. I, Eleanor Hartwell, take you, Thomas Brennan, to be my lawfully wedded husband, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I promise to love you with all my heart, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build a life and a home with you. I promise to be brave enough for this love, to trust in us even when I am afraid. You rode 100 miles to return what I had lost, and in doing so, you gave me something infinitely more precious. You gave me hope and love and a future. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that gift. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Tom kissed Eleanor, the whole congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by everyone in town. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Tom thought he had never seen Eleanor look more beautiful than she did that day, her face glowing with happiness as he spun her around the makeshift dance floor. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Tom and Eleanor slipped away to the small cabin James had helped Tom build on the edge of the ranch property. It was just 2 rooms, simple and rough, but Eleanor had filled it with small touches that made it home. Curtains for the windows, a quilt on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the table. Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan, Tom said, carrying Eleanor over the threshold. Welcome home yourself, Mr. Brennan, Eleanor replied, kissing him soundly. They had their whole lives ahead of them, and it was not always easy. That first winter was brutal, with blizzards that buried the ranch under feet of snow and temperatures that dropped so low the water froze in its bucket overnight. Tom taught Eleanor how to survive the cold, how to dress in layers, how to read the sky for incoming storms. They huddled together in their little cabin, feeding the fire and telling stories and making love while the wind howled outside. In the spring, true to his word, Tom and James built Eleanor her school. It was a simple one-room building, but it was sturdy and warm, with big windows to let in light and a small stove for heat. Eleanor wrote letters to charitable organizations back east, and to her surprise, several responded with donations of books and supplies. By fall, she had 15 students, ranging in age from 6 to 14, all eager to learn. Tom would ride by during the day sometimes, ostensibly to check on a fence line or move some cattle, but really just to hear Eleanor's voice through the open window as she taught her students about mathematics and history and literature. She was in her element, patient and passionate, bringing learning to life for children who otherwise would have had no education at all. Martha's baby was born that winter, a healthy boy they named Samuel. Eleanor was there to help with the birth, and she fell in love with her nephew immediately. Watching her hold the baby, Tom felt a fierce longing for children of their own. "Someday," Eleanor said when he mentioned it, "but not yet. I want you to myself for a while longer." Tom was content with that. He was content with everything, really. He had a wife he adored, work he found meaningful, a community he was part of. He had built a life that mattered, and it all traced back to that moment on the trail when he had seen a flash of silver in the dust and decided to do the right thing. 2 years after their wedding, Eleanor gave Tom the news he had been hoping for. She was pregnant. Tom picked her up and spun her around, laughing and whooping, and Eleanor scolded him for being reckless, but she was laughing too. Their son was born on a clear spring morning, howling his way into the world with impressive lungs. They named him William, after Eleanor's father, and Tom held his tiny son with shaking hands and made silent promises to be the kind of father his own father had tried to be, to protect and provide and love without reservation. Eleanor took a few months off from teaching, but by fall she was back in the schoolhouse, baby William sleeping in a basket beside her desk while she taught. The students adored him, and the older girls would take turns watching him during recess, cooing over him and fighting for the privilege of holding him. The years passed in a blur of work and love and small daily joys. William grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and learning in equal measure. 3 years after William, Eleanor gave birth to twin girls, Anna and Rose, who had their mother's dark hair and their father's blue eyes. The little cabin grew crowded, so Tom built an addition, then another, until their home was a sprawling, comfortable place filled with laughter and noise. Tom took over as foreman of James's ranch, a position he held with the same integrity and dedication he brought to everything. He earned a reputation as a fair boss and an excellent judge of cattle and horseflesh. The ranch prospered under his management, and James was able to expand, buying up adjacent land and increasing the herd. Eleanor's school became the pride of Broken Creek. She added a second room and hired an assistant teacher when the number of students grew beyond what one person could handle. Children came from ranches 20 miles away to attend, boarding with families in town during the week. Several of Eleanor's students went on to attend university back east, an unheard-of achievement for ranch kids, and they wrote her letters crediting her with changing their lives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tom took Eleanor back to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. The wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the landscape in shades of purple and gold and red. They spread a blanket and had a picnic, just the two of them, the children safely ensconced with James and Martha for the day. "Do you ever regret it?" Tom asked as they lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. "Marrying me, I mean. You could have had a much easier life back east, married to some wealthy businessman or lawyer." Eleanor rolled onto her side, propping her head on her hand so she could look down at him. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "You gave me my life back, Tom. When I lost that locket, I felt like I had lost everything." I was drowning in grief and fear, and I did not know how to find my way back to the surface. But you rode 100 miles to return something precious to a stranger, and in doing so, you showed me that there was still goodness in the world, still kindness and honor and love. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. Tom reached up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. You saved me right back. I was drifting before I met you, never settling, never connecting. You gave me a home, Eleanor, a real home, not just a place to sleep between jobs. We gave each other a home, Eleanor corrected. She fingered the locket at her throat, the locket she still wore every single day. Sometimes I think about that moment when it fell from the stagecoach. How easily you could have missed seeing it, how you could have decided it was not worth the trouble to return. Our whole life together hinged on that single moment, that single choice you made to do the right thing. I think we would have found each other anyway, Tom said. Maybe not the same way, but somehow, some things are just meant to be. Eleanor kissed him, slow and sweet. I like to think so too. They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking and laughing and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this place. 10 years of marriage, 3 children, a home, a community, a love that had only deepened with time. It was not the life Eleanor had imagined for herself when she left Boston, frightened and grieving and alone. It was infinitely better. As they rode back toward the ranch, Tom pointed out landmarks to Eleanor, telling her stories about each one. The creek where he had taught William to fish. The grove of cottonwood trees where the girls liked to play house. The hill where they always watched for the first snow of winter. This land had become theirs in the deepest sense, marked by memory and labor and love. I want to be buried here someday, Eleanor said suddenly. Not in some town cemetery, but here on the land. With you beside me and the mountains in the distance and the sky going on forever. That is a morbid thought for an anniversary, Tom said, but his voice was gentle, not morbid, hopeful. I want to rest in the place where I was happiest, surrounded by everything we built together. Promise me, Tom. When the time comes, however far in the future that may be, promise me we will rest here together. I promise, Tom said. Though I plan on us having many, many more years before we have to worry about that. And they did have many more years. They raised their children to be strong and kind, taught them to work hard and think independently and treat others with respect. William grew into a tall, serious young man who had his father's way with horses and his mother's love of books. He eventually took over management of the ranch, allowing Tom to slow down a bit as his body began to feel the effects of decades of hard labor. The twins were complete opposites despite sharing a face. Anna was quiet and thoughtful, always with her nose in a book, determined to become a teacher like her mother. Rose was wild and adventurous, more comfortable on horseback than in a schoolroom, with a gift for training even the most difficult animals. Both girls were courted by seemingly every young man within 100 miles, but they were picky about who they gave their hearts to, having grown up with the example of their parents' love as a standard to measure against. Tom and Eleanor grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces mapping out the years with lines of laughter and hard work. But they still held hands like newlyweds, still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking, still sat on their porch every evening and talked until the stars came out. The school Eleanor founded continued to thrive, even after she retired from teaching at the age of 60. Her legacy lived on in the hundreds of students whose lives she had touched, many of whom became teachers themselves, spreading education across the frontier. The town of Broken Creek grew and prospered, and the Brennan family was at the heart of it all, respected and loved by everyone who knew them. When Tom was 72 and Eleanor was 68, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch was hosting a huge party, with people coming from all over the territory to celebrate the couple whose love story had become something of a legend. "Tell us again how you met," one of the great-grandchildren begged, a little girl with Eleanor's dark eyes and Tom's stubborn chin. Tom and Eleanor exchanged glances, and Tom could see his whole life reflected in his wife's smile. "Well," he said, settling the child on his knee, "it all started when your great-grandmother dropped her locket on the trail from Cheyenne. And your great-grandfather rode 100 miles to return it," Eleanor added, her hand finding Tom's and squeezing tight. 100 miles, the child breathed. "That is so far." "It was worth every mile," Tom said, his eyes on Eleanor, "because at the end of that ride I found the love of my life." The party went late into the night with music and dancing and storytelling. Tom watched his family, all the lives that had sprung from that single choice he made on a dusty trail so many years ago, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been just a cowboy, nobody special, but he had tried to do the right thing, and that choice had changed everything. As the party wound down and guests began heading home, Tom and Eleanor slipped away to their favorite spot, the porch of their house that looked out over the land they loved. The moon was full, casting silver light over the meadows and hills, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. 40 years, Eleanor said softly. "Can you believe it has been 40 years?" "Best 40 years of my life," Tom said. "Though I have to say, you are even more beautiful now than you were the day I first saw you." Eleanor laughed. "You are a terrible liar, Tom Brennan." "I am old and gray and wrinkled." "You are distinguished and wise and perfect," Tom corrected. "Every line on your face is a story we lived together. Every gray hair is earned." "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. After a while, Eleanor reached up to touch her locket, the way she still did whenever she was feeling emotional. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" she asked. "I think about the woman I was when I dropped this locket. I was so lost, Tom, so scared and sad and convinced that I would never be happy again. If someone had told me then that within a few weeks I would meet the man I would spend the next 40 years loving, I would not have believed them. I could not imagine being happy again. And now?" Tom asked. "Now I cannot imagine having lived any other life. Every hard moment, every loss, every fear was worth it because it brought me to you, to this life we built together. I would not change a single thing. Not even the parts where I was stubborn and difficult," Tom teased. "Especially those parts," Eleanor said with a smile. "They kept life interesting." They stayed on the porch until well past midnight, holding hands and watching the stars wheel overhead. Tom knew they did not have too many more years left together. His joints ached in the mornings, and Eleanor's breath sometimes came short after even minor exertion. But they had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? Tom did pass away first, 5 years after their 40th anniversary, on a clear spring morning much like the one on which his son had been born. He died peacefully in his sleep, Eleanor's hand clasped in his last words a whispered, "I love you." Eleanor held him and wept, but underneath the grief was a bone-deep gratitude for every single day they had shared. True to her wishes, Tom was buried on the ranch, on a hillside that looked out over the valley. The whole territory turned out for his funeral, and the stories told that day painted a picture of a man who had lived with integrity, kindness, and unwavering dedication to the people and land he loved. Eleanor lived for 3 more years after Tom's death. She spent that time with her children and grandchildren, making sure they all knew the stories of their family, the values that had guided her and Tom through their long marriage. She still wore her locket every day, and sometimes people would catch her talking to it, as if the portraits inside could hear her. On a warm summer evening, surrounded by her family in the house she and Tom had built, Eleanor quietly slipped away. Her last words were about Tom, something about him waiting for her in the meadow, and her children liked to think she was seeing him again in whatever came next. Eleanor was buried beside Tom on that hillside, just as she had wished. Their headstones were simple, bearing just their names and dates and a single line. He rode 100 miles and she loved him forever. The ranch stayed in the Brennan family for generations, and the school Eleanor founded continued to educate children of the territory well into the 20th century. The story of how Tom and Eleanor met became a tale told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that small acts of kindness can ripple outward in ways we cannot imagine, changing lives and creating love where none existed before. And sometimes, on clear spring mornings when the wildflowers are blooming in the high meadows, people riding through that part of Wyoming will see something flash silver in the dust beside the trail, just for a moment, like a locket catching the sun. They never find anything when they stop to look, but they always ride away with a strange feeling of hope, as if somewhere in the vast wild landscape, love is still being born from simple gestures of decency and care. The Brennan family preserved Eleanor's locket as a treasured heirloom, passing it down through the generations along with the story of how it brought Tom and Eleanor together. Each generation added their own memories to the family history, but the story of the cowboy who rode 100 miles to return a locket always remained the foundation, the proof that true love could grow from the smallest seeds of kindness. William inherited the ranch and ran it with the same dedication his father had shown, eventually passing it to his own son. The land prospered under generations of Brennan care, becoming one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming. But success was never measured just in cattle and acres. The Brennans measured it in family dinners, in children taught to read, in neighbors helped through hard times, in the small daily choices to do right by the land, and the people who depended on it. Anna did become a teacher, running the school her mother had founded for 20 years before passing the torch to her own daughter. She never married, claiming she was wedded to her students and her calling, but those who knew her said she had simply never found anyone who measured up to the standard her father had set. She died at 87, surrounded by former students who came from all over the country to say goodbye to the woman who had changed their lives. Rose married a gentle ranch hand who could make her laugh and did not try to tame her wild spirit. They had 6 children and raised them to love horses and the land as much as they did. Rose lived to be 92, still riding until just a few months before her death, still telling anyone who would listen about her father who had ridden 100 miles for love. The descendants of Tom and Eleanor spread across the West, carrying with them the values their ancestors had embodied. Some became ranchers, some teachers, some doctors and lawyers and business people. But all of them knew the story of the locket. All of them understood that their very existence traced back to a moment of choice on a dusty Wyoming trail in 1878. As the West changed, as the frontier closed and towns became cities and the wild places grew smaller, the story of Tom and Eleanor remained constant. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, at family reunions and quiet evenings around dinner tables. It was a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that small kindnesses could bloom into lifetimes of joy, that choosing to do the right thing, even when it cost you something, was always worth it. The little cabin where Tom and Eleanor started their married life was preserved by the family, maintained as a museum of sorts. Inside, visitors could see Eleanor's quilts and Tom's saddle, the table where they ate their meals, the bed where their children were born. And in a place of honor on the mantel sat a small wooden box containing replicas of Eleanor's beloved locket, the real one being far too precious to display publicly. School children on field trips would file through the cabin, their teachers telling them the story of the cowboy and the locket, of love born from kindness and grown through dedication. Some of the children would roll their eyes at the romance of it all, too young or too cynical to appreciate the message. But others would leave quietly thoughtful, wondering if they too might find love in unexpected places, if their own small acts of kindness might ripple outward in ways they could not yet imagine. The meadow where Tom first told Eleanor he loved her was protected by the family, left wild and untouched even as development crept closer. Every spring the wildflowers still bloomed in riotous color, and members of the Brennan family would make pilgrimages there to remember their ancestors and the love that started it all. Some scattered ashes of their own loved ones there, wanting to rest in the place that symbolized hope and new beginnings. The hillside where Tom and Eleanor were buried became a family cemetery, with generations of Brennans laid to rest around their ancestors. The stones told stories of lives well lived, of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren all connected by blood and values to the cowboy who rode 100 miles and the woman who loved him for it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people claimed they could hear laughter on that hillside, see two figures walking hand in hand through the meadow below. Just tricks of light and wind, of course, wishful thinking and overactive imaginations. But maybe, just maybe, love like Tom and Eleanor's did not end with death. Maybe it lived on in the land they loved, in the family they created, in every person who heard their story and decided to choose kindness over convenience, love over fear, doing right over doing what was easy. The legacy of Tom and Eleanor Brennan was not measured in wealth or fame. It was measured in the school children who learned to read, in the ranch hands who were treated with dignity and paid fair wages, in the neighbors who helped each other through hard times, in the family that grew and prospered while never forgetting where they came from. It was measured in small acts of decency multiplied across generations, in love stories that echoed the first one, in the understanding that how you treat people matters, that character counts, that doing the right thing is always worth it even when nobody is watching. The locket itself, that small silver oval that started everything, was eventually donated to the Wyoming State Museum when the last of Eleanor's direct descendants decided it should be shared with the world rather than locked away in a vault. It sat in a glass case, the portraits of Eleanor's parents still visible, the delicate engraving still beautiful despite more than a century of existence. A placard beside it told the story, simplified and compressed, but still essentially true. This locket was dropped from a stagecoach in 1878. A cowboy named Tom Brennan found it and rode 100 miles to return it to its owner, Eleanor Hartwell. They fell in love, married, and raised a family in Wyoming territory. Their descendants still live in the state today. Thousands of people walked past that display case every year. Most gave it only a glance, more interested in the Native American artifacts or the mining equipment or the covered wagons. But some would stop and read the placard, would study the portraits inside the locket, would spend a few moments imagining what it must have been like to live in that time, to make that choice, to build that kind of love. And occasionally someone would walk away from that display case with something shifting inside them, a new understanding that they too could choose kindness. They too could go out of their way for a stranger. They too might find unexpected love if they were just brave enough to reach for it. The town of Broken Creek, where Tom and Eleanor built their life, grew into a small city of nearly 10,000 people by the early 21st century. But the center of town still held echoes of its frontier past. The church where Tom and Eleanor married still stood, its white steeple visible from miles away. The school Eleanor found it had been rebuilt several times, but a cornerstone from the original building was preserved in the entryway of the current structure, bearing a bronze plaque. Founded 1879 by Eleanor Hartwell Brennan, who believed every child deserved the gift of education. The annual Tom and Eleanor Days Festival, held every summer, celebrated the town's history and the love story that helped shape it. There were historical reenactments, a parade, a dance, and a ceremony at the old Brennan Ranch where actors would retell the story of the Locket and the 100-mile ride. Children dressed as cowboys and frontier women, vendors sold crafts and food, and families came from all over the state to participate. It was hokey and commercialized and sometimes historically inaccurate, but underneath all that was a genuine appreciation for the values Tom and Eleanor represented: integrity, kindness, love, community. As decades passed and the world changed in ways Tom and Eleanor could never have imagined, their story remained relevant. In an age of instant communication and disposable relationships, the idea of someone riding 100 miles to return a stranger's lost possession seemed almost absurdly romantic. But that was exactly why people still told the story, still visited the museum, still made pilgrimages to the meadow and the hillside where Tom and Eleanor rested. Because in a world that often felt harsh and disconnected, their story was a reminder that love and kindness and doing right still mattered, that they had always mattered and always would. The Brennan family, scattered now across the country with only a few branches still in Wyoming, maintained their connection to Tom and Eleanor's legacy. They held reunions every 5 years, gathering at the old ranch to share stories and introduce new generations to their history. The family tree had grown into something massive and sprawling with hundreds of descendants, but they all knew the root story, all understood where they came from. And in quiet moments when facing difficult decisions or hard times, descendants of Tom and Eleanor would sometimes ask themselves, what would Tom do? What would Eleanor do? They would think about a man who rode 100 miles because it was the right thing, about a woman who was brave enough to love again after loss, and they would find their own courage, their own integrity, their own path forward. Because that, in the end, was the true legacy of Tom and Eleanor Brennan. Not the land or the money or even the family tree, impressive as all those things were. Their legacy was the example they set, the proof that ordinary people making good choices could create extraordinary love and lasting impact. They showed that character mattered, that kindness rippled outward in ways you could never fully track, that love grown from seeds of decency and respect could weather any storm and last beyond death itself. On the hillside where they were buried, the grass grew tall and wild, exactly as they would have wanted. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic against the endless sky. The meadow below still bloomed with wildflowers every spring, painting the landscape in the same colors Tom and Eleanor had loved. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the grass, it almost sounded like promises being kept, like vows being honored, like a cowboy telling the woman he loved that he would ride 100 miles, 1,000 miles, any distance at all, just to see her smile. That was what true love looked like. Not perfect or easy, but real and lasting and worth every mile of the journey. Tom and Eleanor Brennan proved it, lived it, and left it behind as a gift for anyone wise enough to learn from their example. And so their story endured, passed from generation to generation, a light in the darkness, a reminder that doing right matters, that love is always worth the risk, and that sometimes the most important choices we make start with something as simple as picking up a locket from the dust and deciding to return it to the person who lost it, no matter how far the journey might be.